Thank you for willing to present this important matter. Good noon to you and all those people who are joining us today. We appreciate the time you have taken to talk to some of our audiences and clients who are DACA recipients and who are in different stages. Some of them have challenges, some of them are struggling, and some of them are interested in enrolling in school. So we appreciate the opportunity you provide us. I'd like to start with the introduction of both our speakers, so our audience know their qualifications and hear how they have experienced working with DACA students and DACA recipients. I'd like to start with Angela. Angela's experience with family and employment-based immigration is extensive. She has used her expertise in immigration law to help clients navigate the complex and often confusing world of immigration. Angela is past chair of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Indiana chapter. As a speaker and writer on immigration, she has consulted on immigration policy in Indiana General Assembly and in Washington, D.C. Angela has long been committed to the issue of in-state tuition for undocumented DACA students in the state of Indiana and recently advised lawmakers on professional licensing for DACA recipients. In 2014, Angela was recognized by the Indiana Latino Scholarship Fund for her efforts to increase educational opportunities for immigrant students. In 2018, she was recognized by the Indiana University Latino Alumni Association as Distinguished Alumni of the Year. So we are very excited to have you with us today, Angela. And our next guest speaker is Karina Garduno, serves as the Senior Associate Director at the IUPUI Multicultural Center. She also serves as DACA Coordinator for IUPUI and IU Fort Wayne campuses. As the DACA coordinator, Karina serves as the primary point of contact for students with deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, and undocumented students. In this role, she provides information on available resources and services and coordinates workshops, presentations, and training on the challenges that DACA or undocumented students face. Before joining IUPUI, Karina taught high school in the Indianapolis area for 5 years. Karina is a proud alumna of Indiana University Bloomington, where she received her BA in secondary Spanish education in 2005 and her MA in higher education and student affairs in 2013. So thank you, Karina, for being here with us today. And without further ado, I give the floor to Angela to start us off with her presentation.
Thank you, Kais. Hi, everybody. Hi, Karina. Good to see you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. Hopefully I can do this right and get our PowerPoint up and running. Karina, am I good?
Yes, you're good.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of a background on what DACA is, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and why DACA matters, and some of the history. Now looking at DACA as it's been 10 years since DACA was initiated back in 2012, and what has transpired over those 10 years and why the future of DACA is somewhat uncertain at this moment in time. So we'll start by kind of a basic overview of what is DACA. So DACA is, again, stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It is prosecutorial discretion, and that term is used very often to provide the government with the flexibility and the discretion to prioritize cases, to decide which cases are serious and which cases are not, things like that. And so this is a type of prosecutorial discretion, which basically says they're going to defer removal or deportation of undocumented individuals who were brought to the US at a young age and do not have lawful immigration status. I think it's really important to point out, lot of people question, well, why did we need DACA? It was because we have so many people in the United States who are not able to fix their status, who can't get legal status in the United States for whatever reason. The law is the problem. And so the law, with inaction of Congress, the Obama administration decided to take administrative action, and this was what they came up with. And it's not a law, it's an administrative action. What it does is provides 2 years of employment authorization, which is renewable. With the employment authorization, you can get a social security number and a driver's license, which are things that these students or folks did not have. If they don't have lawful immigration status, they could not get an employment authorization or social security number or a driver's license. So this is a big deal. It provides that the recipient is lawfully present, quote unquote, but no lawful status, which is a little confusing because it isn't a status, but it is saying that the government is allowing you to be here lawfully in the United States. It's not a permanent solution or a path to green card or citizenship. It is possible to get travel authorization if you can prove that you have an urgent humanitarian need. Now, this has fluctuated a little bit over the last 10 years. Initially, any DACA recipient could apply for travel authorization. Then under the Trump administration, travel authorization was completely ended for DACA. And then now we're back to if you can prove urgent humanitarian need. And with the uncertainties of DACA, we are recommending usually that DACA recipients do not travel outside of the United States or apply for travel authorization. I have a couple of clients who are trying it and who have can demonstrate urgent humanitarian need. And so we'll see, we're going to kind of test it and see if it works. You cannot get DACA if you've been convicted of certain crimes. So this is not for people that are, doing bad things. This is for folks that have gone to school, done everything right, have never been convicted of crimes, and were brought here at a young age through no fault of their own. 10 years of DACA we're looking at since 2012 under the Obama administration. And so there are people who have had DACA for 10 years since 2012. Under the Trump administration, they rescinded DACA, but under that time when it initially, they just stopped the whole thing, but then the court said, well, no, you can still renew your DACA, but we won't accept initial DACA filings. And that's still where we are right now. So we have been renewing it for people that had it and continue to have it, but we have not been able to apply for initial DACA. So the Supreme Court held that DACA rescission by the Trump administration was arbitrary and violated the Administrative Procedures Act. And so this went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said the way that they ended it was not lawful, but they didn't comment on the merits of the program or whether the presidential authority whether the Obama administration went beyond their authority. So they didn't even get to that question. They just said, this is in violation. The way that you rescinded it was in violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. You shouldn't have done it that way. If you do it this way, you might be okay. So the Trump administration went back and tried to end it again. And then they're again being challenged in Texas. And currently it is at the Fifth Circuit. So just last month, July 6th, they made their oral arguments, and we're awaiting that decision at the Fifth Circuit. If it is what we think it's going to happen, it will likely end up at the Supreme Court again sometime in October, between October and June. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. That's why it's kind of uncertain. So the Biden administration, in response, had promulgated a rule to codify DACA. And that was expected sometime this year, but it hasn't happened yet. And some folks are concerned that it's not as broad as it should be. And so we still need legislative action. We still need Congress to do something. There is a strong legal foundation for DACA. Deferred action has long existed for certain populations of immigrants, including folks who have suffered abuse at the hands of a U.S. citizen spouse or others. Medical deferred action has existed for people that have a serious medical issue and they need that reprieve, that time to get treatment. So deferred action isn't a new thing. Prosecutorial discretion is also not new. It's a longstanding and customary tool used by courts and law enforcement to prioritize use of resources because they can't possibly deport every single undocumented person in the United States. And so this was a way to prioritize or to deprioritize the DACA recipients. States, in order to challenge DACA, must prove standing, which means they have to prove injury or harm to the state caused by DACA. Oftentimes this is shown by states have claimed that because they have to issue driver's licenses, this is an added cost. And so that constitutes harm. And others say, well, but the cost of not issuing driver's licenses outweighs the cost of issuing driver's licenses. So it's kind of up in the air. What exactly injury or harm would mean to the state. The fact is that it's been life-changing for over 800,000 people in the United States, and they have been able to come out of the shadows, have been able to work, to drive, to get, degrees, to go into their career, their field of study, to really contribute to the economy and to our local communities. And again, there is a lack of resources to deport all individuals. And even more, it would do great harm to the economy, especially right now, given the labor shortage that everyone is experiencing in almost every field. So we need people here, and we need people to be able to fill jobs. There's a lot of jobs out there and a lot of companies that need people. But the fact is we need a permanent solution through a rule or through legislation, and we need Congress to do something. The challenges here, and Karina's going to talk some more about this too. In Indiana, there's no in-state tuition or state financial aid for undocumented students. So if you're undocumented, you won't qualify for in-state tuition because we have a state law. We have tried every year to change that. The good news is that DACA recipients do qualify as Indiana residents for tuition purposes. And most of our state institutions have recognized that and have applied that to their DACA populations. And so the DACA recipients should be paying in-state tuition if they qualify. However, they're still ineligible for state and federal financial aid. That has not changed. That is a federal law and would need state action. There are a few states that have changed their state laws to allow for students to get state financial aid, and that is allowable, but Indiana is not one of those. So unless Indiana, the state legislature, changes its laws, we don't provide for state financial aid. The funding limitations created here force us to look at other resources like private foundations, scholarships, things like the Indiana Latino Scholarship Fund and others. I know Karina is going to talk about some of these too. But one thing I skipped here is enrollment offices sometimes are inconsistent in how DACA students are identified. I think this has primarily been not an issue recently because most of the institutions that allow them to get in-state tuition will also declare or allow them to be domestic and not classify them as international students. But I know we've seen that as an issue. Are they international students? No, they're not. They're not on an F1 visa. Are they domestic students if they're DACA? So that, I think most of them have come to the conclusion that they are domestic. Donors who want to support students need help and guidance to know that this is a population and to have places where they can put the funds so the students have access to the funds. So that's very important. And I think an opportunity that we can grow and get better. One outstanding question, it's always been a question when I give a presentation to anyone is, can they fill out the FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid? My answer to that question is yes, they can fill out the FAFSA. However, don't ever claim to be a US citizen or provide false information. You will be declined or denied federal aid, but the institution sometimes, it depends on the institution, might use that FAFSA information to gather information in order to distribute other funds. And it really depends on the institution. So I don't know, it varies from institution to institution, but yes, you can fill that out. Or some institutions have created a similar form, an internal form that is much like the FAFSA that is used to, qualify for the existing funds. So here are a list of funding sources and options. Again, trying to be creative, thinking outside the box, trying to navigate those donors so that they can put money in these private and foundation scholarships so that they're not restricted on whether you have to have immigration status or not to get the money. School scholarships, and maybe sometimes when they run through the school, they are touching state money. And so one of the biggest concerns is that any school scholarship might be restricted by the Indiana law. That's why we prefer to go the other way and route that money through private and foundation scholarships. Private loans, not a great option, but could be an option if you have a cosigner. Obviously, a loan, you have to repay a loan. So better to get free money, right? Scholarships are free. You don't have to pay them back. Private loans are going to be paid back at an interest rate. And so you want to make sure that you're not getting a super high interest rate. The other option for DACA is they can work. So they have employment authorization, so they can work for the university. Some universities have been very flexible in providing payment plans. Employers have now become more aware of DACA and decided they want to support DACA recipients. I've had some employers say, we'll help you renew your DACA, we'll pay for it, we'll pay for the attorney fees, whatever it takes, because they have recognized the value that the DACA recipients bring to their company. And now they've been there for years, some of them. So they have become a part of these companies and these families. And then looking at alternatives to a 4-year degree. You don't have to complete your degree in 4 years. If you can't afford it, maybe break it up a little bit, or Karina's going to talk about some of the pathways you can take and different community college options and things like that. So if you work for a campus, and this is some suggestions that come from an organization called the President's Alliance for Higher Education and Immigration, which I am a part of, their legal advisory council, and 3 things that they can do to prepare for a post-DACA world. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with DACA, so we kind of have to think, what do we do if they strike it down and it goes to the Supreme Court and then DACA maybe goes away? We don't know. So number 1 is to create non-employment-based funding opportunities. So have opportunities where you can funnel that money so it doesn't look like, or it isn't qualified as employment, quote unquote employment. So it's not unauthorized. Number two, engage in state efforts to assure that students are eligible for in-state tuition and financial aid. This is a huge opportunity in the state of Indiana. Some states are way ahead of us. Indiana is way behind on in-state tuition and state financial aid. Number three, have an advocacy plan. If the Fifth Circuit issues a negative decision, campuses should be ready to inform, educate, and reassure the students that they're safe and that the university, the schools are gonna support them regardless of the court decision and that it's not over yet. Here's some additional resources. This is a court refresher. If you are that kind of legal, you have the interest on the legal side of things, this is what is going on or what has happened. Sometimes it's really hard to understand why the courts did what they did, what's actually in court, what's the Fifth Circuit, what state is this in, who's on the court, all of these things. And so this is a refresher. The National Immigration Law Center has a really good explainer there. And then I have a couple others. This is a checklist for campuses to support undocumented campus members. And I also think it might be attached. I'm not sure if Kais, if we've got that somewhere here, but I can pull it up. And then the National Immigration Forum summary on the state of DACA. So basically saying what's happening now, what's happening in the future. And that is it. So I will turn it over to Karina now. Karina is going to cover some of the campus specific things that she's been wonderful and amazing on creating resources for DACA on the ground. And so thank you, Karina, and I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angela. Let me see.
And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela. I just wanted to point out that all the links you showed on the PowerPoint is now shared in the comments section. Thank you, Angela. I just wanted to point out.
Wonderful. All right. So
Go
I'm
ahead,
going to talk
Karina.
a little bit about applying to college as DACA students. I do work for IUPUI, so some of the examples that I am going to show are IU or IUPUI specific, but that doesn't mean that some of our other colleges in the state don't have similar resources. So I think one of the first things that is important for us to keep in mind when we're talking about going to college for any student really, but more importantly for our DACA students, is that there are different roads to a degree, right? I don't want our students to get stuck in this mindset that they have to do it in 4 years, because that's not even the reality for a lot of students anymore. But particularly for our DACA students, there are several ways that you can get to your end goal. So one of the things that we talk about a lot with our students who have DACA or who might be undocumented is taking a look at a community college and maybe starting there and taking classes there first. It's going to be a cheaper option, particularly given the financial challenges that they have. And most of the colleges in the state have some sort of agreement with our community colleges about transferring over credits. I know for sure that IU and IUPUI campuses do have that. So a lot of our students will actually start at Ivy Tech, take their prerequisite courses, which are basic courses that a lot of students have to take. And then they will actually transfer to a four-year institution when they're ready to take more major specific courses. Then there is also the option of going part-time. So if you're having to pay for your education out of pocket because maybe you haven't secured enough scholarships or other life circumstances, you can take a couple of classes at a time. Just realize that it is going to take a little bit longer for you to get to that graduation. Either way, I think you need to think about what's the most important thing for you. Is it to get that degree, or is it to be done in a certain amount of time? For most of our students, it's going to be to get that degree and that experience. When you are looking to apply to a college, one of the most important things you can do is to do your research on a couple of different things. One of the things that I advise our students on is to really take a look at the career path that they're wanting to take. So what is it that you want to do once you graduate, and how do you get there? What are the degrees that you need to have? What are some of the classes and the experiences that are required to get those degrees, to fulfill those requirements? And then again, what are some of the requirements for working in the field? So in particular, I think about our medical careers. We have students who want to be nurses. One of the requirements for getting that nursing degree is that you do clinicals, which means that you're going into the hospitals. In order to get into the hospitals, you're going to have to pass a background check. So you're going to need a social security number to be able to get those background checks done. Another requirement for going into those hospitals is that you have health insurance. So you want to make sure that you are aware of what the requirements are before you go into the programs so that you can make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row. When it comes to working in the field, again, you want to know, does my field require some sort of test? Do I have to get some sort of licensing? For a lot of the licensing here in the state, you do have to have a social security number in order to get licensed. So again, something important to know before you start going into that. Unfortunately, we do have some students who just come into my office and they're like, Karina, this is what I want to do. And then in conversation, I realize that they don't have all of the things they're going to need to meet those educational requirements. And then they're like, this was the only thing I ever planned on doing. So now they have to go back and rethink what their educational journey will look like. If we can start doing that ahead of time, that would be super helpful. The other thing that does is it helps you narrow down what colleges and universities you're going to, right? Not all of the colleges offer the same programs. So start looking into what universities or colleges do offer what you want. What does the enrollment size look like? So if it's a smaller college, if it's a larger college, just depends really on what your preferences are. How far is it from home? If you're a DACA student and you're like, I'm having to pay out of pocket and maybe put some scholarships together, you might want to stay at home so that you don't have to pay for a dorm. So what are your options when it comes to staying in the same city? You also want to ask about campus resources. It's completely okay to ask if there is someone on campus who is knowledgeable about DACA, or if they do have some sort of center of some sorts. Most of our colleges in Indiana have at least a person that you might be able to talk to. Some of us have designated people. For some of the colleges, it's just someone who holds another title but is knowledgeable. And then one of the big ones for our DACA students is, what is the cost to attend the college? As Angela mentioned, do they offer in-state tuition for our DACA students? I can tell you that the IU campuses, we do have a process where our DACA students can apply for in-state tuition. You do have to meet all of the other requirements to be considered an in-state resident, but for the most part, our DACA students have been able to meet those requirements. And quite a few of the public institutions in Indiana do have something similar. Our private schools look a little different, but that's because their tuition's a little bit different. No matter what school you're attending, every school has to have some sort of calculator on their website where you can go in and plug in some information and it'll give you an estimate of what the cost is to attend school. It's super important that you have a very solid plan of how you're going to pay for classes, because there comes a point where if you owe the school too much money, they won't allow you to register for the next semester. So it's really important to take a look at this before. So here's an example of what it might look like depending on the information that you insert, and it gives you estimates on, like, you also have to keep in mind you're going to have to pay this much for books and supplies if you decide to stay on campus, transportation, things of that nature. So as Angela said, we have to get creative when it comes to paying for school. So where can we find that money? One of the biggest suggestions that we give our students is to make sure you're looking for private scholarships. So CICF is an organization that houses several of the local Indiana scholarships that don't require citizenship or residency. So that is a great resource, and we're going to drop the link in the chat. The Indiana Undocumented Youth Alliance also has a scholarship that they put out. Again, great resource for our students. As Angela mentioned, our DACA and undocumented students cannot receive state or federal aid. So I really need our students who attend a public university to ask about funding if they're offered a scholarship. Unfortunately, sometimes there is a mistake that happens where our students may get offered a school scholarship at a public university, and then later they realize they are not going to be able to have the scholarship because it is state or federal money. So anytime you're offered a scholarship at a public university, you might want to inquire as to where the funding is coming from. For our private universities, most of their money is private, so they have a lot more flexibility to offer school scholarships to students. So that's one of the differences between public and private universities. And then also remember that you can work on or off campus, as Angela mentioned. Working on campus, your employers are going to be a little bit more flexible and understanding of the fact that you're a student. So there might be some benefits to working on campus, but then also working off campus might work a little bit better for your schedule. You really just need to stop and think about what's going to work best for you. When it comes to actually applying for for college, there's a couple of applications that people have. So one of the big ones is the common application, which some of our high schoolers might be familiar with. This application allows you to apply to several schools at one time. That application currently does not have a way for you to self-identify as a DACA student, but they are working on it. So it should be coming soon. Some of the school applications, however, will allow you to identify as a DACA student. So for example, if you're applying to any of the IU campuses and you decide to use the Apply IU application, you can apply to several of the campuses in one application for one fee. And it does allow you to self-identify as being a DACA student. So let me show you a little bit of what that looks like. One of the questions you'll have on the application is your citizenship status. Again, as Angela mentioned, you never want to lie about this. You want to be as honest as possible when it comes to that. And then once you hit that you are not a citizen, it will then give you a list of options of what your status might be. And one of the ones that we have on the Indiana application is this DEF action, which stands for Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals, which means that you are a DACA student. The benefits to that is that it allows us to go in the system and then pull the names of students to provide resources for you. So we are not legally able to share that information with outside individuals. We do not use that in any way to cause harm. We simply use it to be able to communicate with students about resources, scholarships, and then we've been using it to provide updates to our students about what's going on. It was super helpful when the Trump administration first tried to get rid of DACA because we were able to then host workshops to help explain to the students what some of these things were, town halls for the community also. So there is a benefit to identifying, but again, it is a choice. You don't have to if you don't want to. And then the other question that I get a lot when it comes to the application is when it comes to state residency. So there are different types of residencies. You could be not a US citizen, but still be a resident of Indiana. So if you've been in Indiana for a certain amount of time, you are considered an Indiana resident. So just kind of keep an eye out for that. We get a lot of questions about that. One example is, let's say you were brought to Indiana when you were 2, you are now 18. You were more than likely an Indiana resident because you've been here for 16 years at this point. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out to your campus's admissions office. They can help you navigate the application if needed. And then just some resources that you want to make sure that you're connecting with if you are looking to attend universities. As I mentioned, a lot of universities have either centers or staff that you can ask questions to or reach out to. If you're going to a college that maybe is not an IU college, definitely feel free to reach out to me and I can tell you who my colleagues are on that campus who I've had communication with, who might be great to connect with. Also, the Indiana Undocumented Youth Alliance does some amazing work in the state of Indiana, so it's a great resource. United We Dream is a national organization. They do a lot of great work around keeping individuals informed. They have some tutorials on how to do specific things, like if you're looking to renew your DACA, some steps to take, things to think about. Anytime anything new happens with DACA, they put something out where they will have a Facebook Live actually, and they will kind of explain what that all means for everyone. And another great resource is Dream USA. If you're looking to come to one of the IU campuses, we actually have a DACA website. So IU has a website, it's daca.iu.edu. And on that website, you'll be able to see the various resources that we have. We keep it updated with what's happening with DACA. You can also click on the campus resources and it will tell you who the campus contact is for DACA students. So IU has gone through and identified at least one person on each campus that our DACA students can reach out to regarding resources or anything else that they might need. We also give some just information about if you're looking to get a lawyer, things to think about. We have an article that Angela wrote a while ago too about paying for college on there. So it's got a lot of great information. And that is the basics of my presentation. Here's my contact information. As I mentioned, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Even if you're not coming to an IU campus, I have great colleagues all over the state that I can try to connect you with or help with general questions if you have any. So I think at this time, we're going to go ahead and start opening it up to questions.
Thank you, Karina. It was really helpful and insightful about different ways that DACA students can approach this. So we invite questions from our audience, and at the same time, I have a couple of questions for you. So for you and for Angela, if I start with you, just stepping out of the paperwork and all the forms and all that, how would you describe DACA student experience on campuses, IU campuses, and that could be similar to other campuses?
So I think one of the determining factors for that is going to be the actual student and how much they want to get involved on campus, right? So I have had some students who have done the legwork and have applied to like 5 to 7 scholarships every week and have been able to piece together scholarships to pay for their whole schooling. So they have the freedom of not having to work and have the ability to then be involved with 3 or 4 organizations on campus. I have other students that have to work part-time. So they work part-time, come to class, and they get involved with maybe 1 or 2 organizations on campus. I think one of the biggest things for our students to keep in mind is that it's great for you to get involved on campus to some degree. You don't have to overdo it. You don't have to become president of all the orgs, but community is going to be really important as you're navigating the college experience. But I feel like our students have been able to handle that, and they've been doing an amazing job doing it.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up for you. So suppose somebody is a DACA recipient who is just getting ready to start looking for options for school and funding sources. What would be your advice on how they can prepare for it and how they can approach both?
Right. So as I mentioned, it does take time. So you are going to have to do quite a bit of research to find those scholarships that you're eligible for and to apply for. The good thing is that a lot of the scholarships will ask similar questions. So once you come up with your essay or personal statement for a scholarship, I would suggest that you have someone review that. And then what you can do is as you continue to apply for other scholarships, you can take pieces or maybe just make a couple of changes to the one that you've previously submitted for another scholarship to make it fit this new scholarship. You don't have to keep rewriting everything from scratch every time, but I think really getting that feedback to make your essay strong is what really helps. And then putting in the work and making the time to find the scholarships and apply for the scholarships. Because I can tell you, I know some community contacts who will say, Karina, we have these scholarships, but people aren't applying for it because the students are like, oh, I'm not going to get it, so I'm not even going to apply. Well, some of these organizations have money and they're waiting for people to apply, but they can't give it to you if you don't submit an application.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. Now, Angela, I want to hear your experience working in for DACA students and their rights and their well-being. You have been a lawyer and you have worked at different levels for advocacy, for raising awareness, and also DACA cases. Share your personal story, your experience in this field, please.
Well, before DACA, I had worked at the Indiana Department of Education and saw the barriers to post-secondary education for undocumented students, and had written my final paper for law school when I was in law school on that very topic. This is pre-DACA. And so then worked very hard to try to get in-state tuition for undocumented students. And we succeeded in some respects because we tried to get people who had been grandfathered, who had been here for a certain period of time, but then DACA happened and we succeeded in getting DACA students recognized for in-state tuition purposes, and then went on to help pass legislation about professional licensing. So I've been involved for a really long time. And I think and then worked in-house counsel at IU with Karina and others to launch some of these initiatives. And when, the travel ban was put in place, we had a town hall and we addressed the questions of the international students, and we helped try to reassure them that they are welcome and that they are valued and appreciated and that we were listening to them. And I think that's super important. And I'm so proud of the work that we were able to do. I think I want to underscore one thing that Karina said earlier, that this happened when the travel ban was really geared towards international students and not DACA students. But the question was, is ICE going to come to the university and find us and deport us? And we said, absolutely. I mean, obviously we can't guarantee anything, but the university cannot share private information, your personal information, with anyone outside of the university. It's a law, it's a federal law, it's called FERPA. And FERPA, Karina and I would take this class, you have to take the FERPA every year. And so you can't disclose anything. So on one hand, it protects the university personnel from being obligated to do something if they believe someone is undocumented. That's not what they're there to do. They're there to educate. And it protects the students who, are going through the application process and very scared about disclosing whether they themselves or even their parents are undocumented. The student may be a US citizen, but their parents are undocumented and they are fearful of exposing their parents. So there's a lot of stuff, but there are also protections in place that make it a safe space for students and the university employees.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Angela. And I have a follow-up for you. So from a legal perspective, what do you hear the legal arguments moving forward for or against DACA, and where will we be in the next 5 years?
That's a great question, and I don't know. What I hope is that the Biden administration will promulgate the rule. We'll have a rule at least, but it's probably going to be challenged. I don't know. I think the Fifth Circuit will probably issue a negative decision on DACA, and then it will go up to the Supreme Court. Now, they might issue a stay. So anyone who has DACA should not be afraid, because what has happened in the past and everything indicates that if you have DACA, your DACA will continue to remain valid until the expiration date. So they're not going to take it away retroactively. They're going to let that play out. And what we were doing strategically is making sure that if you're eligible to renew your DACA, you do it as soon as possible, because then you're going to get another 2 years. So make sure that if you're eligible, you're renewing regardless of what happens in the courts, so that you can cover yourself as long as possible. So the Supreme Court obviously is more conservative now, and it probably won't look good for DACA. That would be my assumption. However, there remains prosecutorial discretion, and depending on who's in office, we've seen with the Biden administration the reversal of a lot of things that the Trump administration put in place. So it really depends on who's in office, who's in Congress, and what can we do to encourage them to pass some kind of immigration reform?
Thank you. And I have a follow-up that is for both of you from legal and from education perspective. What are some of the myths and misunderstandings around DACA so that our audience knows and are empowered by that information?
Mm-hmm. I can say one that I hear all the time is, why can't they just get legal? Why can't they just fix their status? And I think it's super important to point out that there is no path to fix their status. And it's really hard to believe that, but our laws don't provide for certain people who maybe entered the country without inspection or have been here for so long without status. There is no way for them to gain lawful status in the United States. That is one primary reason why DACA exists in the first place, to give people something that had nothing. What we need is a permanent solution. So that's one of the most, I think for me, I've heard that question for years, is why can't they just get legal? Well, it's because the law doesn't give them any ability to do that. It's very restrictive. So, and they can't stay and fix it here, and they can't leave and fix it. If they leave the country, they're going to be subject to a 10-year bar. So there's a bunch of misconceptions around that whole thing. Karina, what about you?
For me, a lot of what I hear is, can they go to school? Absolutely. We
Yes.
are one of the states where they can go to school. Our undocumented students can go to school. Our DACA students actually can do a lot of things that our undocumented students who don't have DACA can. So yes, they can go to school. They can get licensing for some of the careers that they want to do. So that should not stop them if they want to come.
Thank you. That's helpful. So let me ask you another question, Karina, and that is, how can university educators, administrators, and communities actually support DACA students on their campuses?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we as universities and just anyone in general can do is to become knowledgeable, like know what DACA is, know what's happening with DACA. There are a lot of great articles or different pieces that are on the internet that will allow you to hear or see what their experiences have been like without having to ask somebody or asking them to relive what they've been through. So you can kind of get an understanding of what their challenges are. I think as universities, one of the things that IU has done is we've put together a committee to be proactive. So anytime anything happens, we're like, okay, if we do get a negative decision from the Fifth Circuit Court, what are our options? What are we doing? We're also looking at some of the policies that we have as a university. Is this unnecessarily creating a barrier for our students to be able to take part in certain pieces of the university or complete their requirements? I think that's important. I think as individuals, if this is something that you really feel that you can help with, we just ask you all to call your representatives and let them know anytime that anything is coming up that would affect the population. So driver's licenses in Indiana is one for our undocumented students. In-state tuition is another one for our students. So really just kind of getting involved in making sure that your representatives know that you as a constituent are here to support this population and want to make sure that they have access to resources also.
Thank you. That was very helpful, Karina. And Angela, as an advocate for the DACA students, DACA kids, these kids, they didn't have a choice when they entered the country, and they grew up here within our neighborhoods and communities. So they are the most vulnerable in our communities, in our neighborhoods. How can the community come together to support DACA students, organizations and foundations and members of the community who care?
So I think money is a big thing for funding. Even if you can pay in-state tuition, it's so expensive without any form of financial aid. So give to be a donor, give to the groups that don't restrict scholarships based upon immigration status. I think that's, for me, that's number one. And number two would be understanding that they're carrying a lot of burden, that they didn't choose this, and they're kind of in a sticky situation, especially not knowing what the court's going to do. And so I think the other piece of this is mental health, and really looking at, you know, how are we being holistic in our approach to supporting the students and their mental health when they're carrying so much of the burden themselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Karina. And I just want to share with our audience and with you that the Immigrant Welcome Center, we are working with other partner organizations to provide for the basis for municipal IDs for undocumented immigrants who can use those IDs for identification purposes and for receiving benefits at the county level, at the city level, and just something that they are deprived of, to show that they are a person and they are with the name and all that. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being with us and answering the questions on your presentation. And will it be okay if I forward any questions I receive from the audience your way, so we can create that channel and that communication?
Yep.
And if you two have anything that you have not shared yet and you want to take a minute to share, please go ahead and do so before we close.
I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just want to say thank you and just reiterate, if you have any questions, if you're a DACA student or maybe an educator and have questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, same here. You can email me anytime. My email was on the PowerPoint, but it's angela@adamsimmigration.com, and we will be here to help you in any way we can.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Karina. We appreciate it. You have a blessed day.
Thank you. Take care.